For my presentation, I'm going to be going over childhood apraxia of speech, or CAS as I'm going to be referring to it. And CAS is a rather unusual speech and language hearing disorders, as you'll only find 5% of children who are even diagnosed with a speech and language disorder will even have CAS. On the screen I have ASHA's definition, and ASHA is the American Speech and Hearing Association. And essentially, their definition for CAS is a neurological speech and sound disorder caused by some sort of damage or abnormality to the nerves, resulting in impairment during the phonological planning. And I also have an umbrella on the screen to illustrate that this is very much an umbrella term that encompasses various different injuries or disorders that a child might have will result in CAS. So the three different causes or examples that will result in CAS are a neurological etiologies, which essentially just means a stroke, trauma, or infection. And then next, we have a complex neural behavioral disorder, which means a genetic or metabolic behavioral disorder. And the reason why I have on the screen if it's secondary or primary, that's mainly concerning because CAS may occur with another speech and language disorder. It does not always mean that it will. And it is important for a speech pathologist to understand whether or not it's primary or secondary to help us understand the child, get the gestalt of their therapy, and mainly for us in their planning. And lastly is a neurogenic disorder, an idiopathic neurogenic disorder. And essentially, that just means an unknown nerve damage, or that we know that there is nerve damage, but we cannot pinpoint where exactly it's happening or why this nerve damage has occurred, as we can with the other two previous examples. So the main difference with CAS and how it differs from other more commonly found speech and language hearing disorders is that the issue is occurring with the motor planning. So that means that the mobile articulators are having issues with sequencing or moving. It does not mean that there is any deficit with the muscles. All of the structure is in place. There's no weakness with anything. It does not mean that it cannot coincide, but that which would be dysarthria, but is not under the definition of CAS. And when you're speaking to a child with CAS, you'll often find that they will begin speaking with groping. So they'll grope for the word before speaking. You'll also see long pauses in between words or in between sentences. Very inconsistent speech errors. Consonant, vowels, consonants, vowels, consonants, consonant, vowels. They will be at every point in position of the word, and they will be inconsistent from word to word or day to day. It makes it very difficult to pinpoint a child's speech errors with CAS. And lastly, you'll also find a robotic quality to their voice when speaking. So assist, simply, this is a type of therapy that we're going to be using with this child, and I'm going to explain it so you can better understand it and utilize it with the child. And essentially this just means that the more you practice the therapy, the better the results, and the more time spent practicing the therapy, the better the results. So the more hours, the more days in a row spent practicing, the better, the faster this child is going to see improvement, is going to have legible speech. And that's again why getting everyone here in a school setting on the same page is going to enable the child to see the best chance of success and the fastest growth. All right. Next, I'm going to go over KSLP, or the Kaufman Speech and Language Protocol. And I'm going to go over what this looks like so you can understand some of these intentional speech errors and what they're going to look like. So, for example, we have a target word of no. and the child says moo. We ask them to say the word again and they say ma. So at this point, the child is making speech errors at every point, and they're very inconsistent. So maybe we'll just work on nonsense speech or focusing on those speech sounds in no of oh, no, and working on those until the child is able to say them free of errors and then building up. As well, we will begin to use visual representation when we're referring to things. So we could have a picture or the actual object. An example would be a car. We could show a car, a picture, or a toy car. When speaking to something, we can also use different types of cueing. Gradually, we reduce the cueing until we're only showing the visual representation, until the child can use this word in a normal activity. And the end goal is that they're able to use this in what we refer to as adult speech, or as in a full sentence, right? I rode in a car today to school. That would be our end target goal, but how we get to there is we might use different approximations. So on another slide, I have an example where this particular child has an affinity for pandas. So they will say pan. Pan is an example of an approximation. It's also an example of deletion, which is a normal process for learning speech. And we're going to use that to help the child to acquire these speech sounds while also still being able to be understood. Again, we have on this page, I have in brackets some of the examples of approximations or shorthand you could say that this child is using for some of the words that they are not able to say free of speech errors or unintelligibly is how they're currently saying them. And another great example would be Gma, because this particular child happens to take the bus to Gma's house. So different types of cueing that you can use in day-to-day when you feel like you're having a hard time getting the child to create understandable language. So we can point to our face to get attention. The more attention you have on the child and the child is looking on you and looking at your face when you're speaking, the better. You can also touch the child using tactile cues in order to gain their attention. You can also incorporate American Sign Language, as this child does know some, another form of language that you can use whilst communicating with them if you do happen to know any ASL. And as well, when the child is then going to say the word, and if you have an idea what they're going to say, you can also grope or mouth for the word, pardon me, you can mouth for the word for the answer that you expect them to say. And on the screen, I have some examples of ASL that you can use. And again, words like yes and no would be wonderful to add. A great example or a real life practical use of this is if you happen to be a bus driver. And in this case, you can use or you can cue to the bus and point to it to ask them, yes, yes, ride, bus, and you can physically point or cue to the bus. You can use ASL sign language to cue to them. You might even need to actually use tactile cues and grab onto the child's shoulder to get their attention and make sure they're paying attention for the best chance of results, so you can confirm that yes, today they are taking the bus to GMA's. Another great example would be if you were the lunch lady. You could physically gesture and point to the foods that you are offering. If you see the child groping for the beginning of the word and you think that that you know what they're going to say, you can say it first and then mouth it for them as the child is groping or beginning to say the word. And on the next page, I have some resources that you can use for your own edification and resource. Thank you so much for your time.